Imagine, you're just sitting there maybe soaking up a beautiful day, warmth on your skin, sounds of nature, and that big question hits you. Who am I? Who is this me experiencing all this?
It's fundamental, isn't it?
Exactly. And today on the deep dive, we're really going to dig into that. We're looking at it through this lens of what our sources call the virtual self.
Yeah, the VES.
We've gathered some really fascinating material, and the plan is to pull out the most compelling ideas about this I that we all feel.
And it's amazing how many different angles there are. I mean, you've got philosophy, religion, neuroscience, and they all weigh in.
Totally. So our mission today is to explore these different takes and really grapple with this idea of the self being, well, virtual.
Should be interesting. Where do we start? Philosophy.
Yeah, let's do that. I mean, philosophers have been wrestling with this forever. You go back to Descartes, right? I think, therefore I am.
Cogito ergo sum.
Yeah.
Classic.
But even after he's sure he exists, the question is, okay, what is this thinking I? And, where is it? Is it just brain stuff?
That's the million-dollar question he left us with. He kind of separated mind and body, but, that didn't solve it. Later on, you get Hume.
Right. Hume thought the I wasn't really a thing at all.
Exactly. More like a continuous flow of perceptions. A bundle, he called it. No stable self to find.
And William James even linked it to head movements. That seems kind of weird.
Well, maybe the unique feeling of our own body's movements. Berkeley called it a thinking principle. Dennett sees it as an abstraction, something useful, but not concrete.
And then there are people like Sam Harris saying it's just an illusion. Like you look in the brain and there's no self-center.
Pretty much. He argues you just can't pinpoint it neurobiologically. So yeah, a huge range of ideas just within Western philosophy.
Okay, but then Antonio Damasio throws a bit of a curveball, doesn't he? He says maybe we're thinking about it wrong. Not a thing, but a process.
Right. That's a key shift. He talks about two vantage points. There's the observer self kind of reflecting and the knower self, the one engaging and focusing.
And he thinks consciousness itself comes from layering these self-processes onto basic mental stuff.
That's the idea. It moves away from a static self to something dynamic, constantly happening.
Which ties in nicely with the neuroscience view, right?
Yeah.
The brain building models of itself.
Absolutely. The neurophysiological perspective sees the self emerging from brain activity. It's a process. And like Harris suggests, you could maybe even have consciousness, raw experience, without this strong feeling of a persistent separate me.
So the brain could be doing its thing, processing the world, creating experiences.
Without necessarily generating that extra narrative layer of I am the one doing this, neuroscience finds dynamic patterns, not a fixed self spot. It's all about the flux.
Okay, so the scientific angle points towards something fluid, maybe constructed. Let's switch gears. How do religious traditions handle this I? They've been pondering it for millennia, too.
Oh, definitely. Take Hinduism. Right away, you get the concept of a soul, an essence beyond just the body parts.
The Atman, right? Or soul with a capital S.
Exactly. And this soul is on a journey reincarnation. Your actions in one life, your karma, supposedly shape your next one. You could come back as a wise person or maybe even an animal, depending on how you lived.
So there's an I that lasts beyond just one lifetime.
Yeah, it transcends the physical. And within Hinduism, especially Advaita Vedanta, you have Brahman, the ultimate reality, and Atman, the individual soul, which is seen as part of Brahman.
Okay, so we need to be clear here. There's the big S-soul, Atman, and then there's the everyday self, the personality.
Right. Our sources use terms like ego, Jivatman, Jiva, or just self with a lowercase s. That's the empirical self, the one living day-to-day life. Our VES, in the terms we're using, it's distinct from that deeper universal soul.
Got it. What about the Abrahamic faiths? Christianity, Judaism, Islam?
They generally share a belief in a distinct human soul, separate from God. Islam often includes the body as part of that essential self, too. Christianity really emphasizes God as the creator.
And you see thinkers like Richard Rohr talking about a true self versus a false self.
Yeah, in a Christian context, the true self is like your soul, connected to God, who you truly are. The false self is more the ego, the superficial personality driven by, worldly concerns. It hints at different layers of self.
Interesting. And Jainism, they have Jiva.
Yes, Jiva. It's seen as a soul or self-possessing consciousness, kind of a subtle body. They also distinguish a true self from the empirical I, a bit like the Atman idea, but not quite pure consciousness.
And their soul is both eternal and not.
Sort of. Eternal in essence, but it can change through moral development. And importantly, they believe in many unique individual jivas, not just one universal soul.
Okay, that leaves Buddhism. Buddha was famously quiet on the whole self thing, wasn't he?
He really was. His main goal was ending suffering, dukkha. The core concept is anatta, no self, rejecting a permanent, unchanging soul or I.
So what we think of as me, mind, personality, memories, Buddhism sees that as just
Yeah.
temporary, always changing.
Yeah, exactly. All impermanent, like the material world itself. The only permanent thing is nirvana, the state of liberation.
So who's doing the experiencing then, if there's no permanent self?
Well, Buddha pointed to the senses and the mind working together. Consciousness arises from that interaction. It's described sometimes as sunyata, empty of a fixed ego, but full of mental content.
So consciousness continues after death, but it's not an eternal soul, more like a flame passing from one candle to another.
That's a common analogy, yeah. A continuous flow, not a fixed entity. Nirvana is what breaks that cycle of rebirth.
Wow. So across these very different traditions, there's this recurring theme of a self that's maybe more than just our everyday experience, or in Buddhism's case, the profound implications of its absence.
Right, and it's into this rich, complex landscape that our sources introduce this idea of the virtual inner world and the virtual empirical self, the VES. It's a way to maybe bridge some of these ideas.
Okay, let's really get into this virtual world idea.
Mm.
Our brain takes in all this sensory data, sight, sound, touch,
Mm.
and builds our reality from it.
Yeah. Essentially, yes. Our source even provocatively says we're like the creator god of our own subjective reality, our virtual inner world. Your experience is entirely constructed by your brain based on those signals.
It's a powerful thought. Like if your senses just stopped, your world would vanish.
Woof. Gone. And think about how much processing is unconscious. Freud supposedly said 95%. Whether that number's right or not, a lot happens under the hood before we're consciously aware of, say, seeing a cup or hearing a voice.
And those things we become aware of, the cup, the voice, they're kind of virtual objects in our mind.
In a way, yes. Constructs based on sensory input, but filtered through our past experiences, our mood, everything. That's what our source calls phenomenal or empirical conscious experience.
The subjective feeling of experiencing these virtual objects.
Exactly. And crucially, the argument is you need an experiencer for that experience. You need a self.
And that's where empirical consciousness, EC, and the virtual empirical self, VES, come in. EC is the awareness. VES is the you having it.
Spot on. And both are constantly shifting, changing. Like Buddha's river, you can't step into the same stream of consciousness twice.
So the VES, this ego I, it's like a collection of all our experiences, built up over time.
Yeah, like layers of an onion or cabbage leaves, as the source puts it, growing with every new experience. And interestingly, the source notes even Buddha might have hinted at this empirical self, this lowercase soul, continuing in rebirth, even while denying the permanent Atman.
But, and this is key, this VES isn't a little person inside our head. No homunculus.
Definitely not.
Yeah.
That leads to infinite regress who's watching inside the homunculus's head. No, the VES is seen as a virtual entity, a representation of mind, intellect, memory, distributed across brain networks.
So treating it as virtual helps bypass that old physical versus non-physical debate.
That seems to be the source's pragmatic approach. Virtual feels less loaded than non-physical and fits better with how we understand information processing in the brain.
Okay, so we've got this VES. How does it actually, interact with the world we perceive?
Yeah. Well, the source describes this neurophysiological process. An external object gets translated into a virtual object in the brain. Then the VES gets associated with it, kind of superimposed onto it.
And that's where meaning comes in. We use our past experiences linked to our VES to understand the object.
Exactly. And in doing so, the VES itself gets updated slightly, like a mini software update with each perception, a virtual reality makeover, as the source puts it.
Is there a brain mechanism for this linking, the superposition?
The leading idea is neural synchronization. Neurons in different brain areas, those processing the object and those representing aspects of the self, start firing together in rhythm, often in the gamma frequency range around 40 hertz.
Like they're all tuning into the same frequency for a moment?
That's a good way to think of it. It binds the object perception with the sense of self. So our underlying sense of VES is always there, but it's constantly being tweaked and refined by what we perceive.
It makes me think of the VES like a tree trunk, and experiences are the growth rings shaping it over time.
Nice analogy. Which leads to the question. If the VES is always changing, what makes you feel like the same you from moment to moment?
It can't just be physical appearance, because that changes too.
Right. The source argues it's the continuity of this internal virtual self, the VES, that gives us psychological consistency.
Think about it. You could break your leg, but you still feel like You'd recognize a friend's voice on the phone even if they look totally different.
But losing your memory of who you are, losing that VES narrative like in advanced Alzheimer's, that's devastating. That feels like a much more fundamental loss of self than physical damage. It's the story that matters.
Now, this idea of a single unified self gets really challenged by split-brain research, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Fascinating stuff. You have the two brain hemispheres connected by the corpus callosum. Sometimes, to treat severe epilepsy, that connection is cut a calcisotomy.
And Roger Sperry's work with these patients won a Nobel Prize. What did he find?
He found the two hemispheres could operate remarkably independently. It suggested, well, maybe two separate streams of consciousness. Two selves, even.
Can you give an example, like that Rose study?
Yeah, that's a classic. Flash Rose to the right visual field, it goes to the left, language-dominant hemisphere. The patient might say they saw nothing,
Okay.
but then ask them to pick an object with their left hand controlled by the right hemisphere, they might correctly pick up a rose.
Whoa. So the right brain saw it but couldn't say it.
Kind of. And then even weirder, if you ask them what they're holding, the left hemisphere, using language, can often then name the rose, even though it didn't consciously see the word initially. It's like one hand doesn't know what the other, or the other brain hemisphere is doing, at least initially.
That really suggests two separate VEs is operating in one head, doesn't it?
It's a strong implication, though there's still debate about the full nature of right hemisphere consciousness. But yeah, seeing patients draw different things with both hands at once certainly points to significant independence. It makes you wonder if our normal sense of unity is just because the hemispheres are constantly chatting.
And it doesn't stop there. Do we experience multiple selves, even without split brains? Like in dreams?
Our source suggests we do. Think about dreaming. Sometimes there's a you acting in the dream and maybe another part of you that's just watching it happen, like a spectator.
Yeah, I've had that feeling. Like being aware you're dreaming while the dream you does stuff.
And what about daydreaming? You might be picturing yourself on a beach while another part of you knows you're actually at your desk.
So maybe we have multiple facets of our VES active all the time. The running you, the eating you, the driving you, and always an observing you.
Potentially. A watching self and an acting self, both parts of the overall VES. Since VES is virtual and superimposed on objects, maybe different aspects can be active simultaneously. The source even briefly mentions dissociative identity disorder as an extreme case where memory fragmentation leads to distinct behavioral selves.
Okay, this VES, it's not just passively experiencing. The source argues it's the cause of, well, both good and evil.
That's a heavy implication, yeah. The idea is that the VES naturally attaches to things, my thoughts, my feelings, my stuff. This desire for ownership stems from the I.
And that desire, the ego, can lead to bad stuff.
When it gets out of hand, yes. Greed, jealousy, lying, stealing, often driven by trying to protect or enhance the self, the ego I. The source references Chris Hedges calling evil the shadow of human nature.
So the VES enjoys good things, sensory stuff, but it's also capable of hate, selfishness, anger. It's pulling the strings.
It's presented as the puppet master, yeah, driving both positive and negative emotions and actions. And this extends to the craving for power, too.
Like micromanagers, cult leaders, even world leaders. The source mentions some names.
Yes, suggesting that the drive for dominance and control is deeply rooted in this self, this VES. The argument is stark. This insidious nature of the self is behind conflicts, wars, historical horrors like the Holocaust, slavery.
It's almost unbelievable. How can a virtual thing be responsible for so much tangible destruction and also so much good?
That's the paradox the source lays out. It's a profound puzzle.
Which leads to an even bigger idea. What if we could detach the VES?
Right. The source proposes that if we could lessen the ego's grip, maybe we could uproot the causes of human evil. That's huge. It touches on religion, mysticism, spirituality, everything. It's called a mystery, even deeper than consciousness itself.
And this detachment links back to attention, doesn't it? We consciously experience what our VES attaches to via attention.
Exactly. Pay attention to something. Attach your VES and you experience it. Withdraw attention, detach the VES, and the conscious experience fades.
So practices like meditation, they're about training this detachment.
That's how our source frames mindful meditation in Buddhism. Learning to observe thoughts and feelings without the VES automatically grabbing onto them and reacting. Becoming the observer.
Like Michael Singer's idea in The Untethered Soul. Taking the seat of consciousness and just watching your inner roommate, the VES.
Precisely. Or the example of watching a sunrise so intently, being so present, that the sense of I just dissolves, leaving pure serenity.
And the Buddhist idea is that this reduces suffering, dukkha, seeing things without the VES's biases and cravings.
Yes, seeing things as they are. That's presented as the core purpose of meditation, to cultivate that less attached, less biased perspective.
And this detachment isn't just mental. It can affect physical pain.
Apparently so. The simplest way is distraction, watch a movie, pain lessons. But
Right.
it often comes back when the movie ends.
But there are stranger examples. Pain vanishing with bad news.
Yeah, the VES focus shifts dramatically. Or those anecdotes, chronic pain disappearing on a trip to see family overseas, or visiting a holy site like Mecca or Jerusalem.
I remember a friend telling me about ankle pain vanishing permanently after a trip to Jerusalem. It sounds incredible.
It does. Even distracting a kid with a story to make a boo-boo feel better works on this principle.
And it's not just psychological tricking ourselves. There's brain evidence.
Our source mentions MRI studies showing less activity in brain pain centers during these detached states. It confirms the brain, influenced by our mental focus, where the VES is directed, is where the pain experience really happens.
So redirecting the VES isn't just about avoiding pain, it's about finding meaning.
That seems crucial for a fulfilling life. The source notes how some retirees in India, losing their purpose, can decline in health. Or elderly widows struggling after their husbands pass.
But then you have these amazing counterexamples. Stigmatis moritis, terminal cancer, goes home to Greece, farms olives.
And lives 30 more years. He said he forgot to die. His VES was focused on living, not the illness. Or Dr. Chevron, passionate about his research, right up to age 91.
And people overcoming huge physical limits. Stephen Hawking.
Incredible mind. Despite ALS, Morris Goodman, the miracle man, learning to walk again after near-total paralysis. Chris Carr, thriving for decades with stage 4 cancer, becoming a wellness advocate.
Arunima Sinha. Losing a leg in a train accident, then climbing Everest.
Astonishing resilience. The common factor seems to be disconnecting the VES's negative focus from the limitation and pouring that energy into a passion, a purpose.
They detached the self from the ailment and found something bigger.
Exactly. It allowed them to find fulfillment, purpose, and improve their well-being against the odds.
Is there another way to detach VES besides distraction or finding purpose? What about intense focus?
Yes, concentration. Like if you have knee pain, instead of ignoring it, you focus intently on the sensation, the thumping or whatever. Paradoxically, it can make the pain fade.
So hyperfocus can also detach the main experience from the pain.
It seems so. It's another way to shift the VES's spotlight. The source suggests the VES is like this virtual entity we can move around by directing our attention. Where attention goes, the VES follows, setting the agenda for perception.
And this isn't just for pain. Detachment enhances all senses.
Because attention is key for the VES's engagement, yes. Detaching from constant mental chatter could sharpen our actual sensory experience. And the potential health benefits are significant for anxiety, stress, blood pressure, maybe even chronic illnesses.
Okay, so wrapping this all up, we have this virtual empirical self, the VES, that sort of leaves, it's the star of the show, the experiencer, the thinker, the knower.
Right, it feels like the center of our universe.
Which leads to that really big question the source raises.
Yeah.
Is the VES actually the one creating this whole virtual inner world? Is it playing God in our heads?
A mind-bending thought, but the source hints that actually no, the VES might be more like the primary enjoyer or user of the virtual objects, not the creator.
Okay, so that just leaves us hanging with an even bigger mystery.
Exactly. If the VES isn't the creator, then who or what is responsible for conjuring up our entire virtual inner universe and everything in it?
Wow. Okay, so that was quite the journey through the virtual self. We looked at philosophy, religion, neuroscience.
Landed on this idea of the VES, how it shakes perception, how detachment might work.
And that really striking paradox of the self being the root of both good and evil.
A lot to chew on.
Definitely. And maybe a final thought for you listening. Take a moment sometime to just notice your own sense of self. Have you felt those moments of detachment where you're just observing?
Yeah.
And what's your gut feeling? What do you think is the source of your own inner world?
It's a question that goes way beyond what we talked about today into your own personal exploration.